This is the Black Information Network Daily Podcast, and I'm your host, Ramses Ja. And sometimes the amount of stories that make their way to us means that we simply can't cover everything that comes our way. But from time to time, a story just stays with me, and I feel compelled to share it with you and give you my thoughts. And now, one more thing.
I got one more thing I want to talk to you about right now.
So, if you're like me, you were surprised by the Israel-Hamas war the same as anyone else, but you didn't really know how to feel about it initially. It may have seemed like another conflict in the Middle East. If you're as old as me, this has been a tale as old as time. And because it didn't affect me and my immediate reality ever in my life, I've never really fully delved into the politics of the goings on in the Middle East. Obviously, as an American, I tended to follow, politically speaking, the American narrative. You know, I consume American journalism. I live here, you know, and in times of war and times of conflict, all of the issues that I stand for, they tend to go out the window for the sake of solidarity. In other words, I'll see the flag and see the troops and feel that sense of pride. You know, I do live in the United States of America. I am an American. And while I believe that this country has a long way to go, this is where I live. This is where my children live and will grow up. And I believe both things can be true. A person can be proud of and critical of a thing, if indeed they want it to become a better version of itself. Now, back to these conflicts in the Middle East. Again, not knowing enough about it to make heads or tails of it, I was subjected to basically these responses that I saw on social media and the way the narrative or the way the story is crafted from news sources and celebrities and, you know, people that when they craft a response, it tends to, you know, reverberate. And so my early understandings of the conflict tended to suggest that Israel was more or less sucker punched and Hamas, or the Hamas, again, I'm very new to this, is the aggressor in the situation. Now, I have wanted myself to become more educated about what's going on because this conflict feels a little different. This one, if for some reason the response and the reaction, and indeed the horrors, feels a little bit stronger than some of the other things that I've encountered, you know, growing up. And again, wanting to get a baseline understanding of what's going on, there's only a handful of people that I trust that I could have a high level conversation with. And one of those people happens to also be a fellow journalist. Now, I'll be fair and full disclosure. The gentleman that's joining me today, Horowitz, is a person that has been on my other show, Civic Cipher. He has come onto my show as a Jewish man, because once upon a time, I felt like Black people and Jewish people needed to start having real conversations that were pointed toward brotherhood and fellowship and understanding. And I was noticing myself that there were a lot of attacks on our Jewish brothers and sisters coming from Black people. And I didn't understand that. And I wanted to give a space and a microphone to someone who could help us understand a little bit more. Since then, a friendship has blossomed. And again, while Ami and I don't see eye to eye on 100% of our politics, I do feel like this man is a good man, and he is pointed toward creating a more peaceful world, a more communicated and connected world. And I believe that our goals are very similar. So a little bit of background on Ami. Ami, not only is he sort of a very globally renowned journalist, you can see his work on channels across the board, but he also produces edgy and powerful YouTube and Facebook videos that have garnered over 500 million views. And these videos have affected global change. His videos have literally changed Swedish immigration policy, U.S. trade policy, U.S. education policy. He's traveled with Syrian immigrants across the Aegean Ocean in a rickety raft. He's been shelled by Iranian rebels and shot at by Islamic Jihad. And he is certainly more knowledgeable, again, about the goings on between Israel and Palestine, or more specifically, Israel and Hamas, or the Hamas. And so he joins us today on this special episode of One More Thing, where I will be educated and hopefully you will be educated too. Hopefully that was a good introduction for you, Ami. I appreciate you coming on to the show, brother.
Thank you for reading it exactly how my mother wrote it.
Well, it's well written, and I believe that, like I said, you're a person who's certainly more qualified than most of the people I know to explain what's happening for those of us who might feel very disconnected from really the reality of what's going on the ground in Israel. So, I guess let's start at the beginning. Give us a little bit of history. You don't have to. I know it's a very, very long history, but
it's about 4,000 years.
Sure, yeah. So a little bit of that, just to kind of help us understand what's going on today. So talk to me.
Yes, I'll go back to how about a little less than 20 years ago, Israel was occupying Gaza. Right, they still occupy the West Bank, but they decided as a test to see if a two-state solution is impossible, that they were going to leave Gaza altogether, right? They had troops all throughout Gaza. They controlled all part of Gaza for about 30, 40 years. And less than 20 years ago, they said, okay, we're going to disengage. That's the word they used, from Gaza completely. Yeah. Every soldier, every settler, every settlement was picked up, taken apart, and moved out of Gaza. And then Gaza had an opportunity to have an election. And they elected Hamas as their leadership.
Okay.
Now, while Israel still controls the northern border of Gaza, so in other words, because it's still the border that they share with Hamas, they control it. They don't control the southern border. The southern border is Egypt, and Egypt can do whatever they feel they want to do with the Gazans, the Palestinians who live in Gaza. So over the last 20 years, what you've seen is basically because they really couldn't get terrorists across the border, they have in very limited instances, they basically over the last 20 years have been sending rockets over the border, attacking Israeli towns up to Tel Aviv. Relatively sophisticated rockets that were co-developed with Iran, funded by Iran. And in response, Israel built the Iron Dome, probably the most sophisticated air defense system that we have in the world, really, when it comes to defending against rockets like interballistic missiles. We're not talking about that. We're talking target area. And there have been this relative détente, right? You're going to send rockets across. We're going to shoot most of them down. We'll have a light response based on that over a period of time. And that's what we've been seeing for most of the past 20 years.
Real quick, can I interrupt?
Now I want to, yeah, of course.
Okay. So the Hamas are sending rockets to Israel, and has Israel, like, first off, I don't know why, if it seems like they've reached an understanding, I'll stay on this side of the border, you stay on that side of the border. I don't understand why the Hamas are still sending rockets. And then B, why is it the case that Israel has only defended itself and not responded to those rockets?
No, they have responded periodically to the rockets.
Okay.
And this is where we get into a little bit of a controversy, right? So a lot of people will say to Israel, now keep in mind, so some context, Gaza is a relatively small strip of land called the Gaza Strip. There's 2 million people there. It's one of the highest density populations on planet Earth, right? Everybody's on top of each other. Now, when Israel responds, Israel is very, very careful about how it responds. Now, what I mean by that is it's difficult to operate in an area like that because A, it's so densely populated, and B, what Hamas does, and again, I want to differentiate Hamas and the Palestinian Authority.
Mm-hmm.
The Palestinian Authority runs, this is the party of Yasser Arafat, they run the West Bank, which has been relatively quiet for the last 20 years. There has been an arrangement, a peace arrangement, more or less, and there has not been a lot of activity between the Palestinians in the West Bank and Israel, as opposed to Hamas. And Hamas is a traditional terrorist organization. In the 90s, they were blowing up buses. They had a spate of buses where they blew up random buses, schools, and this is what led to the disengagement of Gaza.
Yeah.
And so when Israel responds, it's very careful as to how it responds, understanding that, look, it's a large civilian population, but it's difficult because you're bombing from the air, right? And ultimately what they do is there's a lot of different things, a lot of different tactics they have. They, for example, will call buildings. So Hamas, let me go back 1 second. Hamas tends to use its own people as human shields. In other words, Hamas puts its infrastructure in buildings, mosques, hospitals, schools, daring Israel to bomb that infrastructure, knowing that it will cause civilian casualties, and therefore it can claim a victimhood status. Say, look, you're bombing a school, a mosque. This is their modus operandi. I know it sounds crazy for somebody who doesn't really understand or is not involved in the Middle East, but this is a well-established pattern. And it puts us in a very difficult position because it has to respond and it has to attack Hamas infrastructure, but at the same time understands that by doing so, it's going to put civilians at risk. It's a very tough position militarily and morally to put the Israeli army in. But they've found a way to, for example, they may actually put in phone calls to these buildings, to the mosques, saying, look, there's Hamas infrastructure in your building. There's a bomb-making facility. We're going to bomb it in an hour. Please evacuate. And for the most part, they do evacuate. They bomb. And civilians, look, war is a terrible thing. Civilians will always be killed. It's just the nature of war. But if you look at the data, so roughly, more or less, for every terrorist Israel kills, one civilian also dies. That sounds bad. Look, it's every life, every civilian life is important. A terrorist life to me is not really important. Yeah. Every civilian life is important, and you want to protect them as much as possible. But if you look at NATO's numbers, and NATO is also relatively careful. They're also bombing when they were, for example, in the Afghanistan war, where there's no density really. It's a really open area. Oftentimes their numbers were one, military target to 3 to 5 civilians. That's just the nature. And that, by the way, that's a pretty good number relative to war we've seen in the past also. So for Israel to get that number down to 1 to 1 in an area so highly densely populated, when they're actually trying to Hamas is trying to gin up the own Palestinian civilian numbers, it's a pretty good number. Okay. Yet, Israel's taken a lot of flack for killing any civilians. Fair enough. Fast forward now to what happened over the weekend. So Hamas, like I said before, they were generally relegated to just sending rockets over the border. Again, Hamas targets Israeli civilians. Israel is targeting Hamas terrorists themselves. So that distinction is important, and it'll come into play and by the stop me anytime if I'm going on too long.
No, please keep going.
Okay, so this past weekend, we saw an escalation that we've never seen, not just in Israeli history. This is considered to be one of the darkest days in Jewish history in terms of the amount of civilians who were killed.
Yeah, I've heard it compared to Israel's 9/11.
Yeah, so to give you the number, so about 1,200 Israeli civilians at this point, and we think the number is going to go up, have been killed thus far. Relative to the American population, that's as if 60,000 Americans were killed over the course of 3 days. Wow. That's the numbers in terms of the effect of the population.
Scale.
And we're not talking about, and by the way, if they were targeting military targets, I've got no issue with that. They're in a conflict. If they want to target military infrastructure in Israel, look, I wouldn't be happy about that, but that's a legitimate target for them to attack. Mm-hmm. they went after not only civilian targets. And I don't know if you saw the videos that are online.
Yeah,
It's
some of them.
difficult to even say what they did. They were targeting children.
Yeah, that's
Old people. I mean, there's now a story out where they were beheading infants.
yeah.
Okay. They went to an EDM concert. Ironically, a peace dance where they killed over 200 young people. They were raping women in front of their parents, and they were raping women and sending the videos to they would use their social media account to show videos of them raping these people on their own Facebook accounts. The barbary was something we haven't seen since ISIS. It's ISIS type tactics.
Okay.
Horrific human toll that was taken. And that's kind of where we're at now. Now, Israel has now responded by bombing significant targets. This is the largest scale bombing we've seen in many years in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a difficult moral position Israel's been in. They're doing their best to keep the civilian toll down. We don't know what the civilian terrorist ratio is going to be. We know that about 1,000 Palestinians have been killed so far. My guess is the numbers will be similar. Probably over half, if not more, will be terrorists versus civilians. But it's a very difficult position they've been put in. So that's the general primer on where we're at.
Okay, so let me ask a couple of questions here. One of the things that I do know is that there is a part of the conflict, I guess, is based over what is considered to be a foreign government occupying a historically religious site that is significant not just to Muslims and Jews, but to Christians as well. So I have, again, a vague recollection of that being perhaps the source of a conflict, maybe even a different conflict, but I'm sure that maybe there's something connected there because typically that's what a lot of these things are drawn back to. So is that relevant in this conflict?
No.
Okay.
So you're referring, I'm assuming, to the Western Wall and the Dome of the Rock.
Perhaps.
So that's a different part of Israel and Palestine.
Okay.
That's the West Bank and Israel.
Sure. Okay.
That's has nothing to do. So this conflict, there's no occupation with this conflict.
Okay.
There's not a single Israeli soldier or person in Gaza at all.
Okay.
So I actually spent a bunch of time with Hamas undercover. I have a pretty good relationship with Hamas leadership. I got to know a lot of them very well.
Wow.
When I was I interviewed one of the Hamas leaders, a guy who was responsible for one of the most horrific terrorist attacks in Israeli history, where he targeted Holocaust survivors and killed over 18 Holocaust survivors a number of years ago. So I got to know these guys pretty well. And Hamas, as opposed to the Palestinian Authority, which is different, Hamas's goal is the eradication of Israel altogether.
Okay. So this is, yeah.
There's not a single Israeli soldier, government official, Jew located anywhere in Gaza. It is a completely independent government that runs on its own. Israel only controls the northern border. It doesn't even control the southern border. So it can do what it wants in the southern border. Israel because they don't have the ability to supply their own, they haven't built their own energy and electrical grid. Israel actually supplies them with all their electricity.
Yeah, and water too, right?
Water too.
Yeah, I saw that. So okay. Let me ask another question here. For the Hamas, what I remember seeing was that they sent something like maybe 3,000 or 5,000 rockets all at once. And that's how they were able to overwhelm the Iron Dome.
Not really. The Iron Dome worked pretty successfully. The damage that was done, the killing that was done was not by rockets.
Okay.
And the Iron Dome is never meant to be 100%. It's like 98% or 95%.
Sure.
So they didn't really overwhelm Iron Dome. The damage and the deaths they were able to get and we don't know how. And this is, by
Sure.
the way, this is a massive Israeli failure.
Okay.
I mean, and there will be repercussions by that when they start doing a study on how this was done. My guess is Iran was very much involved in helping them technologically.
Iran. Okay. So
Yeah.
supplying them with because I was going to ask, how did they get all these rockets?
So
Where?
Iran supplies them with 95% of their budget.
Okay.
Most of their money comes from Iran.
Is this like a puppet state or a puppet government for Iran then?
Depends who you ask. I would say they're more independent. I wouldn't call them quite a puppet statement.
So why would Iran? What benefit is there to Iran to provide this military or this fiscal support, which I guess translates to military support, to a group that would attack Israel? What does Iran have to benefit from that arrangement?
It's a proxy army. So essentially, Iran is able to attack Israel without any repercussions to it.
So right? That's why you said it depends on who you ask, whether or not it's a puppet government. Okay, understood.
Yeah, I don't know if I call it a puppet government. It's certainly I would call it a partner government for sure.
Okay.
Some would call it a puppet government. I don't know, semantics, I suppose, at this point.
Sure. Okay. Another question for you. My impulse was to think that the Hamas was similar to a lot of the terrorist organizations that I have come to know. You mentioned ISIS, or ISIL is another one, I believe. And the Taliban. And ISIS are the same. Okay. So and the Taliban and there's a few different groups like this. So again, never having heard of Hamas before a few days ago, I was not familiar with them, but these tactics, they seemed extra brutal. And again, just the nature of the conflict felt like akin to a terrorist organization. Now, as someone who's spent time with them, and I'm not going to even play devil's advocate, but you perhaps have more insight into the way of thinking of a Hamas fighter than anyone else. Okay, so what is it that these people believe that they are fighting for, and why would they go to such extreme length? Because I've seen, to piggyback off of what you said, I've seen the car seats where the blood is kind of where the head would be. I've seen people holding their children's bodies. I'm a father. I've seen this and I'm like, wow, these children, it feels like they were targeted because the parents are alive and well.
These are not incidental casualties.
You see what I'm saying?
These were the actual targets, right? As
opposed
to when Israel has been bombing, and there have been children who have been killed in Gaza. Of course. These were terrible. And by the way, no Jew or Israeli takes glee in a single civilian death. There's no joy when a civilian casualty happens in Gaza. Okay. As opposed to when this attack was done, if you saw the images in Gaza, the mothers were out handing candy to everybody in Gaza, celebrating the deaths of these children.
So that's what I mean. I don't understand. Like, I get it when, okay, I'm in this country, you're in that country, we have a fight, and the soldiers go to war. Okay, I get sneak attacks, I get guerrilla warfare. I'm not a fighter at all, but I understand how that could happen. I don't understand what takes a person, and I don't want to paint with broad strokes and 100,000 of these soldiers are all sick, but there has to be something besides, sickness and just painting it with carte blanche. There's something there that would cause human beings to go into another land and pick up the children and then do the things that we've seen. So I'm asking, what do they think they're doing by doing this? What do the Hamas think that they're doing? What justifies this?
So they were chanting just today, yesterday and today. Their chant is, while you celebrate life, we celebrate death. It's a death cult. To them, this is how one behaves to get your objective.
And again, their objective is to eradicate everyone from Israel.
Yes, every Jew from Israel. That's their goal.
So
like when I asked this guy in Hamas, and I said
Mm-hmm.
to him, Palestine, which is what you're fighting for, that's not Gaza and the West Bank, right? He goes, no. Gaza is every single inch of the Zionist entity, what we call Israel. Every inch of that belongs to us, and we will eradicate every single Jew occupier. Remember, they're saying the Jews are occupying not Gaza and the West Bank, occupying Israel, right? Let's not forget, and if you want to go back to history a little bit more, look, Jews have been in that area since time immemorial, thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, of course. This is what I was saying earlier, where they feel like there's a group of foreign people occupying land that belongs to them. So that was
not a foreign group. These are people.
Well, yeah, but they feel that way. That's what I was.
Of course.
Okay.
And
all right, go ahead.
When and by the way, for thousands of years, the land that we call Israel now was occupied by the Romans. They were occupied by the Greeks, occupied by the Turks, occupied by the English. There actually this was land not occupied, not held in a government way by Arabs or Jews for also thousands of years. And what happened was when the British decided to get out, they did what they called a partition. They said, we're going to separate this land between where the majority of the Jews live and where the majority of the Arabs live. And they cut it roughly in half.
Yeah.
And the Jews said, we'll take it, right? They accepted the partition. This is where Jews have been living for all these years. We'll take that little sliver. The Arabs can have the other sliver. And they, on the day of independence, they celebrate their independence. That same day, the Arabs never accepted that separation, that what they call the partition. The day of independence, every Arab army in the Middle East invaded Israel in what was called the War of Independence.
Yeah, when was this?
This was 1948.
Okay, go ahead.
And since then, there's been a number of military wars, like legitimate military wars. Again, I don't demonize an Arab army invading an Israeli army. It's a tactical decision they made in war. Look, I don't love it. I don't like it. They've lost them all. They've been mistakes on their part, tactical mistakes, strategic mistakes. But look, that's a legitimate form of war, right? But then what we saw after 1973, essentially, is we saw a change in tactic by the Palestinians, where we're no longer going to engage in army-to-army combat. We are now going to engage in a terrorist war, a terrorist battle, where we will now only target your civilians because it's just, look, and if they're right, it's just more painful, right? It's a much more painful thing to lose 500 children versus 500 soldiers. It's both awful, but a nation can understand losing 500 soldiers. They're soldiers, right?
Yes.
You can come to it, you can grasp it mentally. It is very difficult to grasp mentally having 500 children targeted and murdered.
Okay.
And they know that, and that's why they do it.
Okay. So how about this? When I was learning about the Taliban, again, a lot of my problems, if you want to call them that, are a lot closer to home. But when the Taliban attacked in 2001, everyone had to pay attention to that, in the U.S. at least, and I was still in school. So I understood, someone made this connection for me. They said the Taliban are the equivalent to the Ku Klux Klan. And how they made that connection is they said that the Taliban is a religious organization, but it's based on, like, almost like if someone was to say that the KKK is a religious organization. It's loosely based on religion, really based on extremism, right? In terms of like the real world implications of their philosophies, the philosophies that they espouse, right? So it was easy for me to make sense of the Taliban as a group, because I can make sense of the Ku Klux Klan as a group. And so when I look at the conflict, because I want to be very careful with the language here. You're saying that Arabs have been attacking Jews over the years, and all of their missions have failed, or all the separate armies over the years have been attacking, trying to kind of recover land that they feel is rightfully theirs, or whatever the story is. Is it the prevailing thought with respect to these governments that the Jews in this land need to be killed or pushed out or whatever? And is that a prevailing thought of the citizens, or are there some citizens who disagree with that and are comfortable on the Arab side, are comfortable with the arrangement and don't want, because again, there are a lot of people who are Muslim that I've met. I haven't had this conversation with them yet, but let me before you respond, because you know what I'm trying to say now. Forgive me, because the question should roll out. It's a great question.
It's a legitimate great question.
So let me wrap this up and put a bow on it, and then I'll listen to you. Again, what I said in the beginning was that there are a lot of people whose response to this on social media has been like, yo, I stand with Israel. I stand with Israel. These attacks are horrible, and so forth and so on, right? And you see the videos and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But not everybody has said that. There have been some people, I suspect, with Muslim religious beliefs or Islamic beliefs, or maybe they have a connection to something like that, who have not condemned this, or maybe even have supported, yes, and like sort of standing with maybe not Hamas but Palestine, right? So again, what is it like, in your best guess, when you're talking to the people, or maybe you've heard stories of the people? Because I can only imagine if the Ku Klux Klan, or the former administration, if that level of extremism had really taken root in this country, given it a few more years, and then that would have been the representation of the U.S., I certainly wouldn't feel that way on the ground. So let's talk about the individuals, so that we're a little bit more dialed in with the human beings, not necessarily the soldiers and the governments.
Let me talk about the governments first.
Okay, please.
So there's been a change, I would say, in the last 20 years, where, yes, I would say every Arab government prior to 1973, maybe even a little after that, they were chanting the same mantra, that we're going to push the Jews into the ocean. Those were their words, right? Because Israel, one border of Israel is just the Mediterranean Sea, and their chant was, we're going to push the Jews in the ocean. That was like their thing. Okay. That's changed. I would say most of the Arab governments now have come to terms that Israel is here to exist. And in fact, many of them have made peace with Israel.
Okay.
Starting with Jordan, and then Egypt, and now with the Abraham Accords. We see the Gulf states, who are, by the way, stridently anti-Israel for generations, have now had a change of heart. And one could argue cynical. Yeah.
And I believe Saudi Arabia was working toward that as well. I just wanted to add that.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Which if you ask me why they did this now, I think they did it to scuttle the Saudi-Israeli talks.
Got it.
Because they were essentially being aced out. They were saying, like, look, if our sponsors across the Middle East are walking away from us, we got to do something, change the dynamics of the geopolitical situation in the Middle East. So I think that's why they did it. So I think most governments have come to terms with Israel. In fact, they've made peace with them, are creating economic cooperation with them, and realize that Israel being there is actually an advantage to them, not a disadvantage. Now, the people are a little bit different, and I think they're mixed. Okay. I've traveled everywhere in the Arab world. I've spent a lot of time talking with them, and like most places, you have a split between people who are a little more moderate and people who are more extreme.
Okay.
I don't know if it's 50-50. I can't put an exact number on it. It's probably 60-40 right now. The 60 want to see the destruction of Israel, 40 don't. That number has changed for the better over the years. I expect, hopefully, that it will as more peace agreements come into play. Now, as far as here in the U.S., even around the world, we've seen some really horrible images of people in New York, in Sydney, in England, demonstrating support for Hamas and saying "gas the Jews." I mean, really awful thing. Oh yeah, that was "gas the Jews" was a chant going on across different cities around the world. So there's still this ugliness that exists. Now, again, they don't represent, like, these do not represent the majority of the Islamic population in America. I don't think the majority of the Islamic population in America want to see the Jews of Israel eradicated. They may side more with the Palestinians than the Israelis. Fair enough. I get why they would, right? I get why Jews would side more with Israel, and I see why people of Islamic faith would side more with the Palestinians. It makes total sense.
Okay.
We can disagree on whether they're right, I'm right, doesn't matter. But there is an undercurrent, and it's growing, of not just, look, you frankly see this from the extreme right and the extreme left, where you're seeing a growing sense of Israel hatred, and Jew hatred goes hand in hand with that. And you saw that expressed in a lot of these horrific, ugly protests that we saw across the United States.
Okay. So let me add on to that. You were mentioned that there are a lot of people who are far right and a lot of people who are far left, and that might inform the optics of this narrative for their benefit, for their purposes. My understanding is that the leadership in Israel is it's far right leadership. I believe the name is Benjamin
Netanyahu.
Exactly. Okay. So this is a far right leadership that is in place there. Do you feel like that has affected the relationship, I suppose, with Palestine? Or when I say Palestine, I don't mean the people who inhabit, I mean like the government.
Not really.
Okay.
Frankly, also, far right. When it says far right, one thinks like a very extremist policies.
Okay.
It's not really an extremist government. It's
Okay.
It's a right of center, maybe right of center government.
Okay.
I don't see it as an extreme right government. I mean,
Okay.
Netanyahu's been a prime minister for Israel for
a long time. Yeah.
Very long time. Some would argue too long. I think nobody should have power, whether you like him or not. I don't think anybody should have power in any government for that long.
Sure.
No, the actual policies of the Netanyahu government when it comes vis-a-vis the Palestinians were very similar to the government before them, which was a center-left government. There isn't a lot of daylight between, and this is something that has happened over the years in Israel, because of the way they've seen the Palestinians respond with terror. The Israeli population has shifted kind of rightward. Like in the 80s and 90s, the peace movement in Israel was large and powerful and had a significant presence in government. They've kind of gone away. There isn't that same kind of leftist, hard left peace movement that was before, because the Israelis have kind of seen the reality on the ground and have kind of moved in that direction.
Sure.
So when it came to, the difference between the center left and the right is more domestic policy.
Yeah.
It isn't much, in fact, look, the peace agreement that we saw with the Arabs, between the Abraham Accords and the one with the Saudis, are all done with Netanyahu, this quote unquote far right government. So in fact, oddly, all the major peace agreements that have been done with Arabs have been done by the right.
Okay.
Egypt was done by the right. What we saw with the Abraham Accords with the right, Saudis with the right. I think a lot of Israelis feel like they trust, even though they may vote with the left, they trust they say to themselves, if the right is making the deal, it must be a good deal.
Sure. They
almost trust the right more with deals than the left, even if they seem to be more left of center. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm following you. I see. The thing is, I'm familiar with right/far right in terms of the U.S. and in terms of U.S. day-to-day life. Yeah. And maybe it's the case that we have the ability to be on the left. I'll speak for me. I have the ability to be a very bleeding heart liberal.
and I love you for that, Ramses.
What'd you say?
I love you for that.
I appreciate it, man. But I have the ability to do that because my day-to-day life doesn't involve rockets and needing sort of protection and needing that. Let me say it this way. I can respect how a more conservative leadership might be effective given all of the conditions that those people living in Israel are dealing with. My question, I guess, was meant to figure out whether or not that was contributing to the escalation of the conflicts, or perhaps it seems like it might actually be protecting from even more and worse incursions. Obviously, this one that happened earlier, the Israel-Hamas conflict, I guess war now, is a notable exception, because obviously this, for all intents and purposes, was a successful act of aggression toward the state of Israel. So let's ask this question.
I think the answer, I think it's totally, I think the nature of this, the constitution nature of this government in Israel, I think is irrelevant to Hamas's ultimate goals and the tactics of what they did.
Okay. Perfect.
I think if this was a leftist government and they were proceeding with a peace agreement with the Saudis, I think it would have been the same result.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Look, it's impossible to test that. Just my feeling.
Well,
look, I know it only in the sense that terrorism has been a constant with Hamas, and it has happened through right-wing governments, left-wing governments.
And left-wing
governments. It's been relatively irrelevant to the government itself.
Okay.
They don't care. If you're an Israeli, a Jew, that's all that matters. Your politics plays no role. When they were slaughtering the Jews, they didn't check who they voted for in the last election.
Sure, that's a fair point. You know, the thing is that there's a part of me that will never understand conflict like this that gets to this level where you're just carte blanche. I hate everybody who looks like this, and I want them all to die.
Because you're a good person, Ramses. That's why you have a good soul.
I appreciate you saying that.
Understand it, because this is the heart of evil. What we saw was looking inside the soul and the heart of evil, and men like you and me have a hard time understanding that.
Sure,
it's so foreign to us, right?
So how about this? I think I appreciate you saying that. That's a very kind thing to say. But I think that by you saying that, it also limits me from being able to, that is a limitation, because I guess the ready assumption on my end is that people in their heart of hearts are like me, and there has to be something that has happened. They've been brainwashed, or they're sick, or something like that has caused them to move away from what I believe are our human biological impulses, which is to fellowship, to connect with each other. Like if I'm driving down the street and there is a human figure in front of me and I'm speeding toward this human figure, it doesn't matter if I'm a racist. It doesn't matter if I hate this type of person or that type of person. I think that the first thing I'll recognize is, oh, that's a human being. I don't want to hurt them. Sure. Right. And then once I'm given context, and if that context jives with the hate I've been taught, then yeah, let me mash the gas and run them down. But initially, that lizard brain compels me to feel compassion before I know anything else. My impulse is to feel compassionate. And so that lizard brain is the thing that I feel makes us, well, I guess it'd make us lizards, but it makes us human. We all share that, at least. That's the tie that binds. And
that's not a universal idea. That's the problem.
And that's such a crazy thing to me. So I appreciate you taking the time to explain this to me. I guess the most that I'll get in terms of the source of this conflict is that it's over land. And that feels like something that's a strange reason to chop off babies. I don't even want to say the rest of it. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry if you've been listening to this. I've been trying to walk around that, but that's the truth of the matter.
I think it's important to say.
Okay, then yes. But that's the truth of the matter here. I don't want to take too much of your time. I appreciate you kind of breaking this down for me. I do want to ask one more question, or a couple more questions before you go. Let's talk about the global implications of this war, because this kind of took everyone by storm. Why is this such a big deal outside of Palestine and Israel and the Middle East?
I think it crystallizes, I'll tell you, it really crystallizes for me the difference between the two sides, not between Hamas and Israel, but the people outside of that conflict. I just did a video where I walked around the East Village, and I asked people I differentiate between leftists and liberals, right? Mm-hmm. Liberals and I have a lot in common. We may disagree on things in the margin, but I'm talking about hard leftists. Mm-hmm. And I asked people who self-identified as hard leftists, and I asked them, did you support this attack against Israel? We're talking about 48 hours after this happened. And the vast majority of them said yes. So to me, I kid you not.
Who would be a leftist that would support any attack? That's okay. Go ahead.
No, the vast majority said they absolutely. They said they were pushed to the brink, and I support. And I said and specifically this, not an attack on a nation state, right? But attack on kids. They go, that's Israel reaps what it sows. This is the response that I got. So this conflict to me crystallizes. If anybody supports Hamas on this thing, I understand now who you are. If you're supporting Hamas and supporting this level of attack, you got to take I think you got to look in the mirror and say, is this really about land or just about anti-Semitism? Is it about Jews? I think that kind of, if you're supporting this level of barbarism, I think that take a very hard look in the mirror and say, what is this really about in my soul? Who do I really hate? I think, it's incredible. Look, I'll give you an example on how, when I first saw this, I was watching, CNN, and MSNBC and Fox News incessantly. And I was watching the coverage very closely. Mm-hmm. And what I saw was very interesting. So at the first 24 hours, the support for Israel was unequivocal across the board. Stand with Israel. This was a terrorist attack. Yeah. This is not a militant group or an army. Israel is 100% on the right on this. And then we started to see a small shift in the coverage, which I thought very interesting. And most people probably didn't pick up on it, but I did. Yeah. What they started to do was when Israel was responding and was bombing Gaza, they were showing images of Gaza and images of Israel, images of Gaza, images of Israel, creating a moral equivalency between the two attacks, where I think there isn't any, right? Again, when your entire war tactic is war crimes, is very different from a war tactic targeting the terrorists when there are incidental civilians that unfortunately and grievously and horribly are killed. To me, there are two very different moral planes. But to show each image back to back, to me, you're trying to make a moral equivalency between the two, and that's what confuses people in the larger population. Yeah. They're not seeing context of Israel's response in Gaza. Yes, again, I can't say this enough. Civilians are being killed, and Israel grieves them. Israel does not celebrate a single civilian death. Yeah. At all. But the way the images are set back to back creates a narrative for the wider world that they're one. It suggests that they're Israel. Who cares? It's the same kind of cycle of. Sure. I hate that term, cycle of violence. Yeah. Because. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me. So I want to make sure that I state this, because every time I have a microphone and an audience, I want to make sure that I'm leaving people with a little bit of myself. And so this is a little bit of myself, and hopefully it's for your benefit too. And please, this is a conversation. I do not know more than anyone except maybe my children. But here's what I want to say. I noticed that a BLM Chicago chapter said something like, we stand with Palestine. And they had that was worse than that. They put a photo of the paratroopers, right? Not a paratrooper. A hang glider. These hang gliders were the one who went to the Peace EDM and then shot everyone up. 200 kids. Got it. Yeah, they were selling. Wasn't even I stand with Palestine. I get that, right? May not be my bag, but I get why somebody would stand with Palestine. I got no issue with that. They were glorifying this particular attack. Okay. So there's that post that came up again, sort of, and they've since kind of came up with another statement that said that they missed the mark on the post or something like that. But this was the BLM Chicago. I believe it was their Twitter page, right? There's been some other people again that I suspect have ties to the Arab world or themselves are Muslim or espouse Islam to one degree or another that have said similar things. Basically, I stand with Palestine, that sort of stuff, right? My belief, and again, I'm saying this just because I have a microphone and an audience. My belief is that the more informed people get,
the clearer you can see what they really mean. And again, when I said for your benefit, I've seen some of your videos in the past where you'll talk to people and you'll ask them questions and sort of like that, do you really know what you stand for? Because if you do this, or if you say this, this is what it means. And people are like, wow, I didn't know that. And that's a part of your journalistic bag, right? And I've seen a lot of that, both, let's say conservative and liberal journalists, or journalistic entities send folks out to do kind of the same thing. But once people realize exactly what they're standing on, either they'll double down on it because they don't want to change their mind. Maybe they have confirmation, or what is it?
Confirmation
bias. The confirmation bias. And there's another thing too, where it's just hard to change your mind. I forget the name escapes me right now, but it's either that or it is people get the new information and then they change. Most people don't do that, but I've seen it happen. We're like, wow, I didn't know that, whatever. So I want to add one more thing to this, and that's that sometimes individuals seem like they represent the masses, and in some instances they do. I had to learn a very hard lesson in 2020, believe it or not, because Donald Trump was, in 2020, Donald Trump was still the president in the first part of COVID. And I had traveled around. I went to all 50 states. And I felt like conservatives were basically a reflection of Donald Trump. Republicans were a reflection of Donald Trump, and they were one and the same. And that was that. And in being in Mississippi, well, Mississippi is, but being in places like, let's say, Tennessee, in the Tennessee mountains, and in places like Arkansas, places like that, where, decent people live there. They're not really extreme. They don't feel this way or that way or the other. That's their guy that they voted for, but they're nice enough to you and me. They don't feel very strongly about this or that or the other. They don't feel like the Charlottesville people with the tiki torches. But they critically, they don't feel like Donald Trump either. I learned that man, Donald Trump, didn't represent to the nth degree all of those individuals. He just represented enough of their politics to get their vote, right? So the reason I'm saying all of these different things is because I want us all listening to Ami's and my conversation today to remember that what we see might be the actions of an individual, not a group. Those actions might be underinformed, and that my belief always is that people mean well. And if they don't, they will let you know as individuals. And we need to judge people individually based on that, and as a group based on, good things. And I think that it requires us to give each other the benefit of the doubt more often than not. But I think that that's a path that will get us closer to a world where we don't have to worry as much about a group sending 5,000 rockets and wanting to push the Jews into the sea. That's sickening. One of the things I want to share with you, I didn't get to share it ever before, but one of the earliest memories of mine was a friend that I had, a schoolmate that I had. And this was an early memory of kind of getting knee deep into, Jewish culture and just Jewish people. I've been around Jewish people my whole life, of course, but this was a friend of mine that I met, might have been my freshman year of high school. His name was Ari Block. He's since passed away. And if you know the name, you know that he's a very celebrated individual now, but he was my actual friend when we were in school together, and we played basketball together, and we listened to Bone Thugs and Harmony, and we would trade CDs, and he could take my stuff and bring it back, right? And having a Jewish friend, he wore a kippah. He used to call it a kippah, yarmulke, whichever one, but he called it a kippah. He explained that to me. He introduced me to more of his friends, and there were I went to a school where there was a lot of Jewish kids. But Ari was the one that invited me to his house, invited me to, worship with him. He said I was welcome to eat with him and his family. And knowing that allowed me to frame every conversation, every anti-Semitic conversation that I had for the rest of my life. Even now that Ari's passed, his memory lives on through me, and I'm able to continue that in conversations like the ones that I have with you, Ami, because I know that Jewish people are my brothers and my sisters. I want to also add that I've been fortunate enough to have traveled, and I've spent some time in the Middle East. And what I found generally in dealing with the human beings, no government people, no military people, the human beings, is that Muslim people are very peaceful people. It's written into their language that they are peaceful. It's how they talk, their art, just every part of their life is based around peace. And there are people that corrupt that the same way that Christianity was corrupted to subjugate Black people, the same way Christianity was corrupted to justify pretty much anything in this country that was not true to indeed what Jesus himself would have stood for. And the narrative that gets chronicled for the larger population of the planet is sometimes inaccurate. And so again, I want to say, let's make sure that we are following these individuals who are very extreme and judging them as individuals, not judging a whole group, race of people. Ami, I will say that I love you. I stand with your people. Obviously, the horrible things that I've seen, they make me very, very sad, especially knowing the history of your people. My heart goes out to everyone over there. And, as the situation continues to unfold, please come back and inform us. If the opportunity presents itself, it's the right thing to do is to have someone who maybe understands a little bit more about the Palestine side of the. I don't think I would ever have a Hamas individual on any of my shows, but somebody to say something, just to bring a human element to the other side of the story here. But in terms of you spending the time with me today, I want to say I appreciate you. I want to give you any last words that you have to share with our listeners before I let you go, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, let me say this: your listeners are very, very lucky that they have you as a host. You are one of the most intellectually curious people I've ever met. Your statements are heartfelt and beautiful, and it means a lot to me that you had me on. I look forward to having more conversations like this with you.
My man, I appreciate you. You're a very kind person. Well, in that case, we'll let you go, man. Keep your phone on because, we got to talk some more. We got a lot of bridges to build, man. And so far, this has been a very fruitful relationship. I do appreciate you. I appreciate where we disagree. I appreciate where we agree. And I appreciate the fact that we can show people that conversations like this tend to heal and inform and bring us closer together. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, Ami Horowitz, media personality, journalist extraordinaire. And do me a favor before you go, shout out your social media and, all your platforms, website, all that sort of stuff, just so people can kind of have some of that connective tissue and find out what we disagree on.
Sure. Just Ami Horowitz, AMI Horowitz, HOROWITZ. It's all the, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. It's all over there.
Perfect. All right. Well, in that case, once again, man, thank you very much for coming on. So we'll talk again soon. All right. This has been a production of the Black Information Network. Today's show is produced by Chris Thompson. Have some thoughts you'd like to share? Use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app. While you're there, be sure to hit subscribe and download all of our episodes. I am your host, Ramses Ja, on all social media. Join us tomorrow as we share our news with our voice, from our perspective, right here on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast.
I got one more thing I want to talk to you.